Evelyn Ashcroft pulled the sapphire brooch from the letter with bare hands and held it up to the morning light, and every thought she had ever had about her marriage collapsed into silence. It was hers. It had always been hers. And yet here it was, returned by a seamstress on Tremont Street who had found it pinned to another woman's gown. Nathaniel had given it away. Given away 80 years of Ashcroft blood like it was nothing. Evelyn set the brooch down on the desk, folded her hands, and made a decision that would change everything. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The letter had no name on the outside. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed when Mrs. Pratt set it on the breakfast tray. No sender, no return address, just her name written in a careful, deliberate hand that belonged to someone who had thought a long time before picking up the pen. She did not open it immediately. She finished her tea. She watched the summer light move across the east wall of the dining room, the way it did every morning at this hour, slow and golden and indifferent to everything happening beneath it. Then she broke the seal and read. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she set it face down on the table, pressed both palms flat against the wood, and breathed. The letter was from a woman named Carolyn Marsh, a seamstress on Tremont Street. The handwriting was plain and honest, and carried the particular weight of someone who had argued with themselves for weeks before finally deciding that silence was the worst choice. Mrs. Ashcroft, it began. I am not a woman who involves herself in the affairs of others. But I have a conscience, and I have seen something I cannot unsee. A young woman had been coming to Caroline's shop since January. Her name was Charlotte Winslow. She was 22, the daughter of a merchant ruined by debt and fire. She had been ordering gowns on a gentleman's coin, quietly, consistently, without explanation. 3 weeks ago, she had brought in a brooch for repair. A sapphire brooch, antique, with a ring of small diamonds around the setting. Caroline had recognized it immediately. Every woman of standing in Boston knew the Ashcroft sapphire. It had been in the family for 80 years. Evelyn had worn it to the governor's reception not 2 winters past. I am sorry, the letter ended. I believe a woman deserves to know the truth about her own life. Evelyn sat with that sentence for a long time. Then she stood across it to the writing desk in the east room, unlocked the small drawer on the right side, and placed the letter inside with the precision of someone filing a legal document. She locked the drawer, put the key in her pocket, went to the bell pull, and rang twice for Mrs. Pratt. Send word to Samuel Bradford's office, she said when the housekeeper appeared. Tell him I need to see him today. Tell him to bring his ledgers. Mrs. Pratt's eyes moved once to the writing desk, then back. Shall I tell him the nature of the business, ma'am? Tell him it concerns the estate accounts. Evelyn turned back to the window. And Mrs. Pratt, not a word of this errand to anyone. Not the kitchen, not Thomas, no one. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. When she was alone again, Evelyn allowed herself 1 full minute of stillness. She stood with her hands clasped loosely at her waist, spine straight. A posture so old it had stopped being effort long ago, and she thought about Nathaniel. 14 years. She had been 22 when she married him. He had been 30 already, building the shipyard that would eventually make him one of the most prosperous men in Massachusetts. He had not been effortlessly charming. She had never been drawn to effortless men, but he had been deliberate about it, which she had found more interesting. He worked at being worthy of regard. He did not always succeed, but he had tried, and she had respected the trying. She had believed for a very long time that underneath the ambition and the pride there was a man who was fundamentally honest. She pressed one hand against the window glass. It was cool even in summer, and the solidity of it was something she needed right then. She had been wrong about him. The question now was not how she felt. She knew how she felt. She had felt it the moment she read the letter, a kind of cold, certain grief, the way a bone knows it is broken before the pain arrives. The question was what she intended to do. Samuel Bradford arrived at 2:30. He was 60 years old, white-haired, lean in the careful way of a man who had always been lean and wore it like a quiet point of pride. He had handled the Ashcroft family's legal affairs for over 2 decades, had been present at Evelyn's wedding, had drafted the documents of her dowry arrangement, had sat across from her father in this very house more times than she could count. He set his worn leather satchel on the cushion beside him, rested his hands on his knees, and waited. "Thank you for coming quickly," Evelyn said. "Of course." He studied her face with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned not to lead. "You said it concerned the estate accounts." "It does. But first, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me the same way." She held his gaze without blinking. "Have you at any point in the past 2 years been made aware of any transactions involving the Ashcroft land deeds or timber rights that were not brought to my attention?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. That was enough. "You already know something," Evelyn said. "Mrs. Ashcroft." "Samuel." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "I am not asking you to protect me from information about my own property. I am asking you plainly. What do you know?" He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he opened the satchel and began removing papers. "6 months ago," he said slowly, "I received a document for my review. A signature authorization for a secondary mortgage on the Marfield farmland, the northeastern parcel that came to you through your mother's estate." He unfolded a document and smoothed it flat on the table between them. The signature appeared to be yours. "It is not my signature," Evelyn said. Samuel stopped. "Look at the letter E," she said. "I curve it inward. This one extends outward. Whoever copied my hand did not study it closely enough." She did not touch the document. She simply looked at it. "How many?" "3 that I have seen." He paused. "There may be more." "There are more." She said it without anger, simply as fact. "I need you to find all of them. Every transaction, every transfer, every mortgage filing for the past 3 years. Everything. Evelyn." He used her given name. He almost never did. "If these signatures have been forged, this is not simply a civil matter. This is criminal. I know what it is. The man who did this, I know who did it." She stood and moved to the window, putting her back to him for a moment. The summer garden outside was in full bloom, deep red roses along the south wall that she had planted herself the year she and Nathaniel moved in. She looked at them and felt something tighten in her chest. "I need to know the full extent of it before I decide anything. I need every number, every date, every name. And I need to know our legal options." She turned. "Can I trust you?" Samuel Bradford looked at this woman, this composed, clear-eyed woman he had known for over a decade, and something settled in his expression that was not quite admiration and not quite sorrow, and was perhaps both at once. "Yes," he said. "Completely." 8 days passed. Evelyn moved through her ordinary life with a composure so complete that no one in the household noticed anything had changed. She received callers. She attended church. She oversaw the household accounts. The real ones, the ones she had always managed herself, which Nathaniel had never troubled to interfere with, perhaps because he had never imagined she would need them to matter. Nathaniel came home for supper 4 evenings out of 8. He was slightly too warm in his manner, the particular brightness of a man carrying something heavy and compensating for it with conversation. He spoke about the shipyard contracts. He asked about the household garden. He did not look at her with the directness he once had, and she noticed, and she said nothing. She watched him the way she read difficult documents carefully, without showing that she was reading. One evening over supper, he reached across the table and touched her hand. "You seem quiet lately," he said. "It's the heat," she said. "It makes me slow." He nodded and returned to his food, satisfied with that, and she looked down at her plate and thought, 14 years, and this is what we've become. She remembered the first winter they were married, a hard winter, the harbor frozen solid. Nathaniel coming home from the shipyard with his coat stiff with cold and his face raw from the wind, and he had come directly to where she was sitting by the fire and taken both her hands in his cold ones and said, "I don't deserve this. A warm room and a woman like you. I don't deserve it yet. But I mean to. She had believed him. She had believed him for a very long time. On the 9th morning, Samuel spread 12 documents across the writing desk and stood back. Evelyn examined each one without touching them. She read them the way a judge reads evidence, starting from the margins, checking the dates following the paper trail from one name to the next and back again. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How much?" she said. "Against your inherited holdings." Samuel removed his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Roughly $11,000. The room held very still. "Is the shipyard solvent?" she said. "Barely. The Navy contracts have helped, but if they don't renew—" He didn't finish it. "They won't cover this," she said. "No." Evelyn straightened the documents into a single pile. Her hands were perfectly steady. "I want copies of everything. Keep the originals locked, not in the general files. A separate case." She picked up her pen. "And speak to Judge Harriman. Quietly. Not officially. I need to understand what legal remedies exist, and in what order. Evelyn." Samuel hesitated. "The governor's charity ball is in 3 weeks. Nathaniel has already accepted for the family. There will be every important person in Boston in that room." "I know. If something were to come to light in a public setting—" She looked up at him, and there was something in her face, not anger, not grief, something beyond both of them that made him stop. "Leave the timing to me," she said. She found Charlotte Winslow's address through Caroline Marsh. She did not go there. She did not write to her. She simply needed to know who this girl was, where she came from, what kind of life had brought her to this particular point. Charlotte was 22. Her father had been a decent man, undone by a warehouse fire and 3 years of bad luck. The family had sold their house on Summer Street and moved to a boarding house in the South End. There was an invalid mother, 2 younger sisters. They were the kind of family that holds itself together with pride and very little else, the kind that cannot afford to appear as desperate as they are. Nathaniel had met Charlotte at a charity auction the previous autumn. Of course he had. Evelyn sat with what she knew for a long time. She had expected rage, the hot, consuming kind. And instead, she found something slower and heavier. Not toward Charlotte, toward the shape of the thing, toward the calculation of it. A man who had looked at a frightened girl in reduced circumstances and understood exactly what she needed to hear, and had said it, and had given her a brooch that was not his to give. Charlotte was not innocent. But she was also not the architect. That man would be home Thursday evening, asking whether the cook had done anything new with the summer fish. 2 days before the governor's ball, Evelyn called on Margaret Livingston. Margaret was 68, a widow, and the kind of woman who had long since stopped needing anyone's permission to say exactly what she thought. She had known Evelyn since childhood. She was also on the committee that arranged seating for the governor's ball. They sat in Margaret's front parlor. The tea was excellent. For 15 minutes they spoke of nothing. The heat, the new minister, Margaret's granddaughter's engagement to a young man from Connecticut. Then Margaret set down her cup. "Tell me," she said. Evelyn told her. Not the documents, not yet. But enough. Enough so Margaret understood the nature of what was unfolding, and enough so she could choose whether to help with clear eyes. Margaret listened without a single interruption. When Evelyn finished, the older woman was quiet for a moment. Then, "The seating chart," Margaret said. "I'm not asking for anything improper. To ensure a certain young woman is placed beneath the brightest chandelier in the room, where every person of consequence in Boston can observe her throughout the entire evening." Margaret picked up her cup again. "That is not improper, my dear. That is committee work." Evelyn's mouth moved the smallest possible version of a smile. "Are you certain you can walk into that room?" Margaret said. "Yes." "And stand in the same space as him without letting him see a single thing you're not ready for him to see?" "Yes." Margaret studied her. One long, steady look. Then she nodded the kind of nod that means the matter is settled and will not be revisited. "Then we shall see what Thursday evening brings," she said. "I have always believed that the truth properly presented is the most elegant thing in any room." Evelyn looked out through the parlor window at the bright summer street, at the city that had watched her be a daughter, a wife, a keeper of a name and a house, and 14 years of a life she had built in good faith. She thought about the brooch, about 12 documents spread across a desk in the morning light, about a girl in the South End who had reached for warmth and found a lie, about a man who had sat across from her at supper and touched her hand and asked why she was quiet. And she thought about Thursday evening, about the moment the doors of the governor's ballroom opened, about what it meant to walk into a room and already know everything the room did not yet know you knew. She set her teacup down. Thursday, she thought. Let him have until Thursday. Thursday came and went without incident. That was the thing about Evelyn Ashcroft that most people in Boston had never quite understood. She was not a woman who moved when other people expected her to move. She had learned that from her father, a man who had once said to her when she was 12 years old, and furious about some injustice she could no longer remember, "The person who acts first rarely acts best. Wait until you know everything, then move once and move completely." She had not fully understood that lesson at 12. She understood it now, so she waited. She went to the governor's ball on Thursday evening on Nathaniel's arm, wearing the ivory silk gown she had commissioned 3 weeks prior, before any of this, when she had still been a woman who ordered gowns without a second purpose in mind. She smiled at the right people. She accepted compliments on her garden, on her household, on the new addition to the Ashcroft Charitable Foundation. She shook the governor's hand and spoke about the summer heat and the harbor, and whether the Navy contracts would bring more work to the Boston shipyards. She did not look for Charlotte Winslow. She didn't need to. Margaret had seen to the seating arrangement with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been managing social events since before most of the guests were born. Charlotte was placed at a table directly beneath the largest chandelier in the east wing of the ballroom. Not prominently, not conspicuously, but precisely where the light fell hardest, and the sight lines from every important table in the room converged without anyone quite realizing it. Evelyn knew the moment Charlotte arrived because she heard the murmur move through the room, the way a current moves through water, felt it more than heard it, a small shift in the energy of the crowd, the way conversations paused half a breath too long in the wrong direction. She did not turn around. She was speaking with Judge Harriman's wife about the new schoolhouse being built in Roxbury, and she kept speaking, kept her eyes exactly where they were, kept her expression exactly as it was, and let the murmur pass through the room like weather. Nathaniel was across the ballroom. She knew that too. She had tracked his position all evening with the peripheral awareness of a woman who had spent 14 years learning every tell. Her husband had the way he stood when he was nervous, the way he laughed when he was performing confidence rather than feeling it, the particular angle of his shoulders when someone in the room had his attention in a way he did not want anyone else to notice. His shoulders were at that angle now. She excused herself from Mrs. Harriman with a warm smile and moved toward the refreshment table, taking the long route, the one that curved past the east wing. She did not stop. She did not slow. She simply passed close enough to Charlotte Winslow's table to see in a single glance what every other woman in the room had already seen. The brooch, the Ashcroft sapphire pinned to the bodice of a pale blue silk gown, catching the chandelier light with the casual confidence of something that had always belonged exactly where it was. Evelyn kept walking. Her hands were steady. Her pace was even. And inside her chest, something that had been very tightly controlled for 9 days made one single movement like a door shifting a fraction on its hinges, and then was still again. She reached the refreshment table, accepted a glass, turned to find Margaret Livingston at her elbow. "Well," Margaret said quietly, looking nowhere in particular. "She's wearing it." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Half the room has noticed." "I know. And the other half will notice within the hour." Margaret lifted her own glass. "How are you?" "I'm perfectly fine." "You are a remarkable liar," Margaret said with something that was not quite approval and not quite admiration, but lived somewhere between them. What do you need from me tonight? Nothing yet. Evelyn looked out across the ballroom. Tonight, I only needed to see it for myself. And now that you have... Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with. She said it the way a woman says something, when she has already decided everything that comes next, and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. The ride home that evening was silent. Nathaniel sat across from her in the carriage, his elbow on the window ledge, his face turned partly away. He had drunk more than usual. Obviously, not in a way that anyone at the party would have noticed, but she noticed. She always noticed. He was the kind of man who became more careful when he was anxious, more precise in his movements, as if the act of controlling small things could protect him from the large ones. Good evening, he said finally, when they were halfway down Beacon Street. Yes, she said. The Harrimans were in good form. They were. Another silence. The carriage moved through the summer dark lanterns, throwing moving light across the interior, and Nathaniel turned to look at her with the particular expression she had come to recognize over these past weeks, the one that was trying to read her without letting her see. It was trying. You seem... He stopped. What? She said pleasantly. Nothing. Tired, perhaps. A little, she said. It was a long evening. He nodded, turned back to the window, and Evelyn watched his profile in the passing light and thought about the letter in the locked drawer, about 12 documents in Samuel's office, about the particular quality of a lie that has been maintained so long the liar has almost stopped knowing it's a lie. She thought about the brooch. She said nothing else for the rest of the ride. The next morning, she sent for Samuel. He arrived at 9 earlier than she had asked, which told her he had been waiting for word. He sat in the east sitting room with his satchel and his careful expression, and before he could say anything, Evelyn set a single sheet of paper on the table between them. I need you to contact the county magistrate's office, she said. Not officially, not yet, but I need you to establish a relationship with the right clerk, someone who can tell us how quickly a civil filing could move through the system if we needed it to. Samuel looked at the paper. It was a list of names the 3 men who had signed as witnesses on the fraudulent mortgage documents. You've identified the witnesses. 2 of them work at the shipyard. The 3rd is a clerk at the Salem attorney's office. She sat down across from him. I want to know which of those men understood what they were signing and which of them were simply told it was routine. If one of them was deceived, then he is a witness, not a co-conspirator, she said. And a witness who understood he was deceived is an extremely useful thing to have. Samuel looked at her for a moment with the expression he sometimes got, the one that was slightly awed and slightly unsettled at once, as if he kept being surprised by the precision of her thinking, even though he had known her for 14 years and should have stopped being surprised by now. There's something else, he said. Tell me. He reached into his satchel and withdrew a single folded document. He set it on the table without opening it. Last week I received word from an associate in Salem. The attorney Nathaniel used for the secondary mortgages, a man named Crowell, has apparently also been filing on behalf of a third party, a business partner. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. What kind of partnership? Shipping. A private arrangement, 3 vessels registered out of Salem operating under a company name that does not appear in any of the Ashcroft business records. Samuel opened the document and turned it toward her. The company name is listed as Atlantic Meridian Trading. The primary investor, he paused, is listed as N. Ashcroft. Evelyn looked at the document, read it once, read it again. He built a second business, she said, with money borrowed against your land. The room was very quiet. Does the shipyard know? His foreman and 3 of his senior partners believe the Navy contracts are financing the expansion. They have no knowledge of the secondary mortgages or the Salem operation. And if the Navy contracts don't renew, the shipyard cannot service the debt. The land parcels go to the creditors. Atlantic Meridian, which Nathaniel controls separately, survives with whatever capital he's moved into it. Samuel's voice was flat and precise, the way a doctor's voice is flat and precise when delivering a diagnosis. He built himself an exit, Evelyn. If everything collapses, he walks away from the Ashcroft name and the Ashcroft debt and starts again in Salem under a different structure. Evelyn set both hands flat on the table. She did not speak for 30 seconds. Then she said, "He was going to let the estate fail." "It appears that was the contingency, yes. The land my mother left me, the timber holdings my father built over 40 years, the farmland that has been in this family since before this country had a constitution." Her voice was completely level. It was the most frightening thing Samuel had ever heard. He mortgaged all of it, and if it failed, he had already arranged to be somewhere else. Yes. And Charlotte Winslow was what part of the new life in Salem? Samuel said nothing. He didn't need to. Evelyn stood. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him for what felt like a very long time, and Samuel waited because he had learned long ago that this woman's silences were not empty. They were where she did her most important thinking. When she turned around, her face was composed. Completely, almost frighteningly composed. "I need 3 things," she said. "First, I need copies of the Atlantic Meridian documents filed with the county registrar. Every page. Second, I need you to speak to the Navy Contracts Office. Quietly. I want to know the exact renewal date and whether there is any flexibility in the timeline." She picked up her pen. "And third, I need you to find out whether Charlotte Winslow has any legal counsel." Samuel blinked. "Charlotte Winslow. She was deceived," Evelyn said. "She is 22 years old. Her family is in a boarding house in the South End, and she is carrying property that was taken from me under false pretenses. She deserves to know what she has actually been given and by whom." She met his eyes. "She is not my enemy, Samuel. She is evidence." 3 days later, Evelyn did something she had not done in 9 years. She went to see her godmother's oldest friend, a woman named Patience Aldridge, who was 71 years old and had spent the better part of her life as the closest companion of Boston's governing class, without ever holding a single official position. Patience knew everyone. More importantly, Patience remembered everything. Every scandal, every arrangement, every gentleman's agreement made over port and candlelight in the rooms where women were not supposed to be listening. Evelyn had known Patience since she was a child. Patience had attended her wedding. She had sent a gift when Evelyn lost her first pregnancy, and another when she lost the second, and she had not mentioned either of those losses in the years since, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which Evelyn had never forgotten. They met at Patience's house on Chestnut Street in the back sitting room that looked over the garden. Patience was small and white-haired, and moved with the careful deliberateness of a woman who had long since made peace with her body's pace, and she poured the tea herself, because she had never entirely trusted servants with the ritual of it. "You look well," Patience said, which was how she always began. "Thank you," Evelyn said, which was how she always answered. They went through 10 minutes of everything that was not the reason for the visit. The weather, a mutual friend's recent illness, the new family that had taken the Prescott house on Marlborough Street. Then Patience set down the teapot and said, "What do you need to know?" "I need to know about a man named Crowell," Evelyn said. "An attorney in Salem." Something moved in Patience's eyes. "James Crowell." "You know him." "I know of him." Patience picked up her cup. "He has been involved in 3 separate property disputes over the past decade, all of which were settled quietly, and all of which involved signatures that were later questioned." Questioned by whom? By people who eventually decided that the cost of questioning them publicly was higher than the cost of accepting the settlement. Patience looked at Evelyn over the rim of her cup. "He is the kind of attorney a man goes to when he wants something done that he cannot ask a reputable man to do. And Nathaniel has been using him for 4 years. Patience was quiet. "I suspected something was wrong," she said after a moment. 2 winters ago, I heard a conversation I was not meant to hear about a land transaction in Essex County. I didn't know enough at the time to understand what I was hearing, but I remembered it. She set her cup down. I should have said something. You're saying something now, Evelyn said. What can I do? I need to know who else Crowell has worked for in Boston. Specifically, whether any of the men he has represented have current dealings with the county magistrate's office or the governor's inner circle. Patience nodded slowly. You're making sure there are no protected connections before you file. I'm making sure I understand the entire board before I move a single piece, Evelyn said. Patience studied her for a long moment. Then she said something that was not quite a question and not quite a statement. You're going to do this in a way that cannot be undone. Yes, Evelyn said. Good, said Patience Aldridge. It should have been done a long time ago. Evelyn was home by mid-afternoon. She went directly to the study. Her study, the small one off the library that Nathaniel had never bothered much with because it contained books rather than ledgers, and she sat at the desk and wrote 4 letters. 1 to Samuel, outlining the next steps. 1 to Judge Harriman's clerk, formally requesting a private consultation on a matter of estate law. 1 to the county registrar requesting a certified copy of 3 specific property transfer documents. And 1 which she wrote last and slowly and revised twice to Charlotte Winslow. The letter to Charlotte was brief. It said only that Evelyn Ashcroft wished to speak with her privately at a time and place of Miss Winslow's choosing, and that the matter concerned something important that Miss Winslow deserved to know. It was signed simply, E. Ashcroft. It gave nothing away. It asked for nothing except a reply. She sealed it and set it aside. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. The hardest part of all of it. Harder than the documents. Harder than the discovery of Atlantic Meridian. Harder even than the sight of her brooch, pinned to another woman's gown, was this quiet daily performance of normalcy. The suppers. The morning greetings. The small domestic exchanges that had once been the texture of a life and were now an elaborate fiction she was maintaining at the cost of something she could feel but could not name. She was tired. Not in a way that sleep would fix. That evening, Nathaniel came home early. He was in good spirits. The Navy had sent word about the contracts, something positive, he said, though he was careful not to be specific, and he sat across from her at supper and talked and laughed and refilled his glass twice and said at one point, I think this could be a very good autumn for the shipyard, a very good autumn altogether. I hope so, Evelyn said. He raised his glass toward her. A small toast, easy and unthinking. To us, he said. She raised hers. To us, she said. And she drank, and she looked at him, and she thought not yet. But soon. Charlotte Winslow sent a reply 2 days later. It came in the same careful handwriting as Caroline Marsh's letter, deliberate, controlled the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write properly and took it seriously, even when she was frightened, which Evelyn suspected she currently was. The letter was brief. It said that Miss Winslow would receive Mrs. Ashcroft at the boarding house on Dedham Street at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, if that was convenient. It said nothing else. It was the bravest thing Evelyn had seen in weeks. Wednesday came. Evelyn went alone. No carriage with the Ashcroft crest on the door, no household attendant. She wore a plain gray wool traveling coat that could have belonged to anyone, and walked the last 2 blocks herself in the summer heat, and she climbed the narrow stairs of the boarding house and knocked at the door of the 3rd-floor room. Charlotte opened it almost immediately, which meant she had been standing close to it, which meant she had been waiting. She was, in fact, exactly as the seamstress had described her. 22 pretty in the soft, slightly fragile way of someone who had once been comfortable and had not yet fully adjusted to not being so. Her dress was the pale blue one from the governor's ball. She had put it on for this, Evelyn realized, and then felt a small ache for the calculation behind that choice. The way a young woman facing the wife of the man who had deceived her would reach for the best thing she owned, would want to feel if nothing else presentable. The brooch was not on the dress. Mrs. Ashcroft, Charlotte said. Her voice was steadier than Evelyn expected. Please come in." The room was small and clean. There was a chair near the window, and a wooden trunk against one wall, and a writing table with a candle on it, and a small framed drawing. 3 figures, what looked like 2 girls and a woman, that Evelyn guessed was Charlotte's mother and sisters. Charlotte gestured to the better of the 2 chairs and remained standing herself, which was technically incorrect by every rule of hospitality, but which Evelyn understood completely. "Sit," Evelyn said. "Please, both of us." Charlotte sat. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at Evelyn with the expression of someone who has decided to hold themselves very still in the presence of something they cannot predict. "I'm not here to—" Evelyn paused, choosing the word. "I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I know what I did," Charlotte said quietly. "I knew he was married. He told me—" She stopped, started again. "He told me that the marriage had been that it was over in all but name, that you had both agreed." "I see. I know now that was—" Charlotte's voice caught once. She steadied it. "I know now that wasn't true." "When did you know?" 2 months ago." She looked at her hands. "He told me 3 different stories about where he'd been on a Tuesday evening. He didn't even seem to notice they were different. And then I started thinking about other things he'd said, other things that didn't quite fit together." She looked up. "How long have you known about me?" 9 days before the governor's ball," Evelyn said. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. "The brooch," she said. "Yes, I didn't know it was yours. He told me it had belonged to his aunt, that it had been left to him." Charlotte's jaw tightened slightly. "I should have asked more questions." "He is a man who anticipates questions," Evelyn said. "He had answers prepared." A silence. Then Charlotte said, "What do you need from me?" It was such a direct question, so unadorned, so stripped of pretense, that Evelyn felt a sudden and unexpected respect for this young woman sitting across from her in the rented room, with her folded hands and her best dress, and her eyes that were frightened but clear. "I need to know," Evelyn said carefully, "whether he gave you anything else, documents, letters, anything that referenced property or business arrangements or a company in Salem." Charlotte's eyes changed, minutely, but Evelyn caught it. "He gave me a letter once," Charlotte said slowly. "I thought it was— he said it was a promissory note, a formal promise, that when things were settled he would provide for me, for my family." "Do you still have it?" Charlotte stood. She went to the wooden trunk against the wall, knelt and opened it. She moved several folded garments aside, reached to the very bottom, and withdrew a small oilskin packet tied with a thin cord. She held it for a moment looking at it. Then she brought it to Evelyn and held it out. Evelyn took it. She did not open it yet. "Charlotte," she said, "I want you to understand something. What I am doing, what I have been doing for the past 3 weeks, is not about punishing you. It is about protecting something that belongs to my family and to the people who depend on this estate. The farm workers, the tenants, the charitable foundation that my mother built." She met the young woman's eyes. "You were deceived. That is not nothing. And it is not your fault in the way that matters most." Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. "And him," she said. "What happens to him?" "He will answer for what he did," Evelyn said. "Not through anger, not through spectacle, through truth." Something in Charlotte's face shifted, a complicated movement. Grief and relief, and something that might have been underneath everything else. The particular feeling of a person who has been carrying a secret alone for too long and has finally set it down. "What do I do now?" she said. "For the moment, nothing. Simply go about your days. If he contacts you, you may speak with him as you normally would." Evelyn stood tucking the oilskin packet into the inside pocket of her coat. "But if he asks about any documents, any papers he may have given you, tell him you don't know what he's referring to." "And afterward," Evelyn looked at her. "Afterward," she said, "you will have a choice to make about what you want your life to be, and I believe you will make a better one than the last." She left the boarding house and walked back to where her driver was waiting, and she did not speak the whole way home. She sat with the oilskin packet in her coat pocket and the weight of what it contained and what it meant. And she thought about Nathaniel, about the letter he had written, the promises he had made, the life he had been quietly constructing in the margins of the one she thought they shared. He had been very thorough. She had to give him that, but he had not been thorough enough. Yuck. When she arrived home, Mrs. Pratt met her at the door. "Mr. Bradford is here, ma'am," she said. "He's been waiting nearly an hour. He says it's urgent." Evelyn handed over her coat, keeping the pocket's contents in her hand, and went directly to the east sitting room. Samuel was standing when she entered, which he almost never did. He had the look of a man who had spent the last hour rehearsing something difficult. "Samuel," she said, "sit down and tell me." He sat. He opened his satchel and removed a single document thicker than the others, folded several times. "The Navy contract renewal," he said. "My contact at the contracts office sent word this morning. The final renewal decision is being made in 6 weeks. That's sooner than I thought." "Yes." He paused. "And there's more. Nathaniel was at the contracts office 3 days ago. He made a formal presentation. He was apparently very persuasive, very confident." Samuel looked at her carefully. "He is operating as though he has already secured the renewal. He has spoken to 2 of his senior shipyard partners about expanding the workforce. He has made commitments." "He's accelerating," Evelyn said. "Yes, which means he is trying to move faster than I am." She sat down slowly and looked at the document in her hands, the one from Charlotte, still folded, still unopened. "He doesn't know what I know, but he knows something is shifting. He can feel it." "How?" "Because he is a careful man," she said. "And careful men recognize when the atmosphere around them changes, even when they can't identify why." She looked up. "He's trying to secure himself before I can act." "Then we need to move." "We will." She set the document on the table and opened the oilskin packet from Charlotte, unfolded the letter inside, read it twice, then handed it to Samuel. "This changes the timeline." Samuel read it. His expression, already serious, went very still. "This is a transfer document," he said. He was transferring an ownership stake in Atlantic Meridian to Charlotte Winslow, Evelyn said, dated 4 months ago, which means he was setting up a structure where if anyone ever examined Atlantic Meridian too closely, there was a named non-Ashcroft party holding a partial interest. She looked at him directly. He was using her as legal cover, Samuel, not just as... She stopped. He was using her in every possible way. Samuel set the letter down very carefully. The way a person sets something down when they are afraid of what their hands might do if they hold it any longer. "Evelyn," he said, "what do you want to do?" She was quiet for 5 full seconds. Outside the window, the summer afternoon moved on without them. Birds' cartwheels, the distant sound of the harbor. The ordinary music of a city that had no idea what was being decided in this room. "I want to file," she said. "Not today, not this week. I want every document in order first. I want Judge Harriman's clerk to have reviewed everything. I want the magistrate's office to be prepared." She looked at Samuel. "And then I want to do it in a way that is public enough that it cannot be quietly settled or negotiated away. I want it to be visible." "The governor's winter charity ball is still 11 weeks out," Samuel said slowly. "I know. If you were thinking of a public venue—" "I'm not thinking of anything yet," she said. "I'm preparing." She folded the letter back into the oilskin packet and held it. "But when I am ready to think about it, I will tell you." Samuel nodded. Then he said quietly, "She gave you this willingly." "Charlotte." "Yes." "Why?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Because no one had told her the truth about any of it. And when someone finally did..." She looked at the packet in her hands. "She was angrier than I was." Samuel was quiet. "She deserved better than what he gave her," Evelyn said. "So did I." She stood straightened and looked at him with the clear, level gaze that he had come to understand meant she had arrived somewhere final. Now let's make sure he answers for both. That night, long after the household had gone quiet, Evelyn sat alone in the east room with a single candle and the stack of letters and documents spread across the desk in front of her. She had done this several times over the past weeks, sat with the evidence, worked through it, made sure she understood every piece of it. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was not studying it. She was simply sitting with it, letting it be real. Nathaniel's name on a document she had never signed. Nathaniel's company in Salem. Nathaniel's letter to Charlotte full of promises made in the same hand that had once written to Evelyn from the shipyard on winter evenings, letters that began "My dear wife" and ended "Yours always." She had saved those letters. They were in the locked drawer with everything else. She thought about taking them out, decided against it. Some things were already known well enough. She blew out the candle and sat in the summer dark for a while, listening to the house breathe around her, the old wood, the familiar sounds, the particular quality of silence that belongs to a place where a life has been built over many years. She thought about her mother, who had planted the roses along the south wall, and who had told her once when Evelyn was young and heartsick over something she could no longer recall, that the hardest kind of courage was not the kind you show in a single moment, but the kind you show every single day in the small decisions no one ever sees. She thought she understood that now better than she ever had before. She stood, straightened the papers, locked the desk, and went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the night and thought 11 weeks. 11 weeks until the governor's winter charity ball. 11 weeks to build something so solid, so complete, so precisely documented that when the moment came, and the moment would come, she was certain of that. Now there would be nothing left to question. No room for a quiet settlement. No possibility of a private arrangement. No way for a careful, thorough, quietly ruthless man to look at what was coming and find an exit he had not yet been closed out of. She had the documents. She had Charlotte. She had Samuel and Margaret and Patience, each of them holding a piece of something larger. All she needed now was time. 11 weeks, she thought again, and closed her eyes. He can have 11 weeks. 11 weeks is a long time when you are waiting. It is almost no time at all when you are building. Evelyn learned this in the way she learned most important things, not from being told, but from living it day by day through the particular discipline of a woman who had decided that this would be done correctly or not at all. She rose early. She worked late. She corresponded with Samuel every 2 days. She met with Judge Harriman's clerk on 3 separate occasions, each meeting shorter and more specific than the last, each one closing another door that Nathaniel might otherwise have walked through. She did not rush, but she did not rest. The weeks moved. August turned heavy and slow the way Boston summers do before they finally break. September came with the first cool evenings and the smell of wood smoke from the hills. October arrived quietly, and with it the final confirmation from the Navy Contracts Office the renewal had been approved. Nathaniel came home that evening with a bottle of French wine he had been saving and set it on the supper table with the satisfaction of a man who believes his future has just been secured. "To good news?" he said, pouring 2 glasses. "To good news," Evelyn said and drank. She had known about the Navy renewal for 6 days. Samuel had told her the morning the letter arrived at the contracts office before Nathaniel had even been officially notified. She had sat with that knowledge for 6 days and said nothing, and now she sat with the wine and watched Nathaniel's face in the candlelight, satisfied, expansive, already moving in his mind toward the next thing, and she thought about what it meant that he could look at her this way. With such ease, such perfect, practiced ease. "The expansion will begin in the spring," he said. "New dry dock. Probably 40 additional men." "That's a significant undertaking," she said. "It's a significant opportunity." He set his glass down. "Boston is changing. The men who position themselves correctly now will define the next 20 years. And you intend to be one of them." "I intend for us to be," he said, and looked at her with an expression that was so precisely calibrated to warmth and partnership that for one single moment, something in her chest moved old muscle memory, the reflex of a woman who had loved this man for a long time. And then it was gone. "Of course," she said. He went to bed happy that night. She stayed in the East Room until midnight, going over the final documents with Samuel's annotations in the margins, checking every date, every name, every number. When she was finished, she locked them in the case she kept under the floorboard behind the writing desk, a precaution Samuel had suggested, and she had adopted without question. Then she went upstairs and lay in the dark beside her sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling and counted the days. 22 remained. The first crack appeared 9 days before the ball. It came not from Nathaniel, but from the shipyard, specifically from a man named Gerald Howe, one of Nathaniel's 3 senior partners, who had apparently spent the better part of a Tuesday afternoon trying to reconcile the shipyard's financing records with the expansion projections, and had arrived at numbers that did not add up in any direction he tried. Samuel heard about it through his contact at the contracts office, who had heard it from Howe's own clerk. Howe had not yet gone to Nathaniel with his questions. He had gone instead to a junior attorney he trusted, which was the kind of decision a man makes when he suspects the person he would normally go to might be part of the problem. Howe is already suspicious. Samuel told her sitting in the east sitting room on a Wednesday morning with his coat still damp from the October rain outside. He hasn't filed anything. He hasn't spoken to anyone official. But he is asking questions. What kind of questions? The right ones. Samuel set a single page of notes on the table. He found a discrepancy between the expansion capital Nathaniel presented to the partners and the actual balance in the shipyard accounts. The difference is significant. Evelyn looked at the number on the page. "He's been drawing from Atlantic Meridian to fund the expansion presentation," she said, "making it look like the shipyard is more solvent than it is. And if Howe keeps pulling that thread, he'll find everything." She looked up. "Has Nathaniel noticed that Howe is asking questions?" "Not yet, but he will. These things have a way of—" "Then we have a shorter window than I thought." She stood, went to the window. Outside the rain was steady and gray. "Samuel, I need you to do something that is going to feel wrong but is necessary. Tell me. I need you to contact Gerald Howe, not officially, not as Ashcroft family attorney. He would close up immediately if he knew whose side you were on. Go as a colleague, a fellow member of the bar with a general concern about a filing irregularity you've noticed." She turned. "Give him just enough to confirm his instincts. Not everything. Just enough so he knows he is not wrong." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "If Nathaniel finds out, he won't. Not in time." She met his eyes. "Howe is an honest man. If he believes something criminal has happened, he will go to the right people. And if the right people are already receiving information from 2 independent directions—" She left the sentence open. Samuel understood. "It becomes much harder to quietly settle." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "And the timing. Before the ball." She said it simply. "I want Howe's questions on record before the governor's winter charity ball. I want there to already be a thread being pulled when I arrive that evening." 6 days before the ball, Nathaniel found out about Howe. Evelyn knew the moment he came home that evening. She had learned over 14 years the complete vocabulary of his moods, and this one she had never seen before. Not anger, not guilt. Something colder than both. He was very still over supper in the way a man is still when he is calculating, and he spoke very little, and twice she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, and that he dropped immediately when their eyes met. After supper, he went to his study and closed the door. She went to the East Room and sat at her desk and listened to the house. An hour later she heard him on the stairs. His footsteps stopped outside the East Room door. She did not move, did not make a sound. She simply sat with her hands folded on the desk and waited. The door opened. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes." He came in. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at her with an expression that had been assembled with great care and was not quite managing to conceal what was underneath it. "Has Samuel Bradford spoken with anyone at the shipyard recently?" he said. The question was so direct it was almost startling. She had expected something more oblique. He was generally an oblique man. The directness meant he was frightened. She filed that away. "Samuel handles estate matters," she said mildly. "Not shipyard business. Why would he speak with anyone there?" "Gerald Howe met with an attorney this week. A man named—" He paused. "It doesn't matter. The man raised questions about our financing structure." "What sort of questions?" "The sort that are not helpful." His jaw tightened. "I want to know if this came from anywhere close to home." She looked at him steadily. "Are you asking me if I've been speaking to Gerald Howe's attorney?" "I'm asking if you know anything about it." "Nathaniel." She kept her voice perfectly even. "I manage this household. I chair the Charitable Foundation Committee. I correspond with Samuel about the estate holdings that came from my family." She let a small pause settle. "If there are questions being asked about the shipyard's financing structure, it seems to me that the shipyard's management is the place to look for answers." He held her gaze for 5 full seconds. She did not blink. "Of course," he said finally. The word came out flat. "You're right." He went to bed before 9 o'clock. She stayed in the East Room until nearly 1 in the morning, writing a letter to Samuel that said simply, "He knows Howe is asking questions. He doesn't know the source. He is frightened. We move on schedule." 4 days before the ball, Charlotte Winslow came to the Ashcroft house. She came to the back entrance as Evelyn had suggested in a brief note 3 days prior, at the hour when the kitchen staff took their midday break, and Mrs. Pratt was occupied with the linen inventory. Evelyn met her herself in the back sitting room and closed the door. Charlotte looked different from the last time. She was wearing a plain brown dress, not the blue one, and her hair was simply done, and she looked older than 22 in the way that a person looks older when they have been doing a great deal of thinking in a short period of time. "He came to see me," Charlotte said before she had fully sat down. Evelyn went still. "When? 3 days ago." "He—" Charlotte pressed her hands together in her lap. "He wanted the letter back, the transfer document. He told me he needed it for a legal filing and that he would return it." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I had burned it." She looked up. "He believed me. I could see that he believed me because he—" She stopped. "He was relieved. He smiled. And something about the way he smiled—" Her voice caught once, then held. "I understood then completely what I had been to him. Not a person he cared for. A piece of a structure. Something he had placed somewhere useful." The room was very quiet. "Charlotte," Evelyn said carefully. "Are you all right?" "No," Charlotte said. "Then, yes, I will be." She straightened. "I want to come to the ball." Evelyn looked at her. "I know I wasn't invited," Charlotte said. I know what it would look like. I know what people would say." She met Evelyn's eyes with a directness that had not been there the first time they met. "But I want to be in that room. I want to look at him when I want to see it." Evelyn studied her for a long moment. "It will not be comfortable. I'm not looking for comfortable. People will recognize you. People will talk. They're already talking." Charlotte's chin came up slightly. "At least this way, I'll be there for a reason." Evelyn thought about it. She thought about the seating plan, about Margaret, about the movement of the evening as she had constructed it in her mind over the past 11 weeks. She thought about what it would mean to have Charlotte in that room, not as a decoration, not as a victim on display, but as a witness. A woman who had been deceived and had chosen in the end to stand on the right side of the truth. "I'll speak with Margaret," she said. Charlotte released a breath. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Evelyn looked at her steadily. "When the moment comes, and it will come, Charlotte, I promise you it will. I need you to be composed. Whatever you feel, whatever you want to say to him, you hold it. You let the truth do the work. Can you do that?" Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. "You've been doing it for 11 weeks, she said. "I think I can manage one evening." Evelyn almost smiled. "Yes," she said. I think you can. Yen. The night before the ball, Samuel came for the last time. He spread the complete file across the writing desk. Every document, every certified copy, every notation from Judge Harriman's clerk, the Atlantic Meridian papers, the forged signature analyses, the transfer letter from Charlotte, the testimony affidavit from James Crowell's former clerk, who had finally agreed to speak in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He laid it all out with the care of a man who had spent 40 years understanding that the difference between justice and injustice was often nothing more than the quality of the paperwork. It's complete, he said. Evelyn stood across from him looking at it. All of it. Everything she had gathered and verified and protected over 11 weeks. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they have built a long time and are seeing whole for the first time. The magistrate's office has been briefed, she said. Yesterday afternoon, Judge Harriman himself reviewed the filing summary. He will have 2 officers present at the ball, not in uniform, not visible, but present in the event that things move quickly and a formal action needs to be initiated. And Gerald Howe has filed a formal complaint with the Shipyard Partnership Board. Quietly. They will hold their response until after tonight. Samuel paused. His business partners know Evelyn. All 3 of them. They've known for 4 days. She looked up sharply. Nathaniel doesn't know they know. He met with them yesterday and apparently found nothing in their manner to alarm him. They are professionally composed men. My God, she said quietly. He is going to walk into that ballroom tonight, believing he has managed this. Believing Howe is an isolated problem. Believing the Navy contract secures him. Samuel looked at her. He has absolutely no idea what is in that room waiting for him. The weight of that settled over her, not triumphant, not cruel. Something more complicated, something that felt almost like grief for the man she had thought she married, and something that felt almost like relief that she had not in the end been wrong about herself. The governor, she said. He's expecting me to address the guests. At 9 o'clock, the usual charitable foundation remarks. Samuel looked at her carefully. What you say beyond the foundation remarks is entirely at your discretion. I know. She began to stack the documents back into order. I want copies of everything given to the governor's secretary before the ball begins. Delivered this evening not through official channels. A personal delivery from you with a note explaining that the contents are relevant to a legal matter currently before the county magistrate. Consider it done. He watched her hands moving through the papers steady, certain, methodical. How do you feel? She stopped. Considered the question honestly, the way she rarely allowed herself to. I feel, she said slowly, like a woman who has been walking a very long road and can finally see where it ends. She set the last document into the case and closed it. And I feel ready. The Governor's Winter Charity Ball was the grandest event of the Boston social season, and the winter of 1816 was no exception. The carriages began arriving at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, every family of consequence in Massachusetts was represented in the ballroom: merchants, magistrates, naval officers, clergy, the wives and daughters and mothers who were the actual connective tissue of Boston's social and political life. The room was warm with candlelight and conversation and the particular energy of a large gathering of people who all know each other and are performing to varying degrees the best versions of themselves. Nathaniel arrived with Evelyn at 8:10. He was immaculate. Dark coat, white cravat, the easy confidence of a man who has decided that the best defense is the appearance of having nothing to defend. He accepted greetings warmly. He shook hands. He laughed at the right moments. He was by any external measure exactly what he had always presented himself to be: a prosperous, respected, charming Boston gentleman at the height of his social standing. Evelyn moved beside him with a composure so complete that 3 separate women commented on how well she looked. She smiled and thanked them. She introduced Nathaniel to a naval officer he had not yet met. She accepted a glass of wine and stood at his side for 20 minutes perfectly at ease, while he worked the room with the skill of a man who had practiced this his entire adult life. And then very naturally, she drifted away from him. She found Margaret first near the east archway. Margaret was wearing dark green silk and the expression of a woman who had been quietly preparing for this evening for 11 weeks and was experiencing something very close to satisfaction. "Everything is in place," Margaret said low enough for only Evelyn. "Charlotte is at the corner table on the left. Your seat is at the governor's table center. Samuel is near the south entrance." She paused. "Harriman's men are in the hall." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "Don't thank me. Win." Margaret touched her arm once, a brief firm pressure, and moved away into the crowd. Evelyn stood for a moment and let herself feel the room. Let it settle around her, the warmth, the noise, the movement of 200 people who had no idea what this evening was going to become. Then she saw Nathaniel find Charlotte. It happened across the room, and she saw the exact moment he registered Charlotte's presence, the half-second stillness in his body, the quick calculation in his eyes, the controlled recovery into something neutral. He looked away from Charlotte, and his gaze moved through the crowd, and found Evelyn without him, seeming to search for her. Their eyes met. She smiled at him, warmly, pleasantly. The smile of a wife who is comfortable at a party. He smiled back, and she watched the slight relaxation in his shoulders. He had looked for threat and seen none. And she thought, not yet. 1 more hour. She went to find the governor. Governor Brooks was a heavy-set, good-humored man who had always liked Evelyn, and who had, she knew, already spoken with his secretary about the documents Samuel had delivered the previous evening. He received her with the particular warmth of a man who is holding something significant and is being careful not to show it. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said, "you look very well this evening." "Thank you, Governor. I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment privately before I address the guests." He looked at her. Something in his expression confirmed what she already suspected. He had read Samuel's delivery. He understood at least in outline what the evening held. "Of course," he said. "Come." They stepped aside into the small anteroom off the main hall, and the door closed behind them. "The documents my attorney delivered," she said. "I've reviewed them," the governor said. His voice was careful. "Mrs. Ashcroft, the allegations contained in those documents, if substantiated, represent serious criminal misconduct." "They are substantiated," she said. "Every page is certified. Every signature analysis has been reviewed by an independent expert. The county magistrate has the full filing." She held his gaze. "I am not asking you to do anything tonight, Governor, except allow me to speak honestly when I address the guests. I am not asking for drama. I am not asking for confrontation. I am asking for the opportunity to tell the truth about my own family's estate in a public room in front of witnesses, so that it cannot later be characterized as a private dispute or a domestic matter." The governor studied her for a long moment. "You understand that once you speak, there is no drawing back." "I have been sure of this for 11 weeks, she said. "I am not less sure tonight." He was quiet. Then he nodded, a single deliberate nod, the kind that carries the weight of a man exercising the full authority of his office in a single small gesture. "You will speak at 9 o'clock, he said, "as planned." "Thank you, Governor." She walked back into the ballroom, and the noise and warmth of it received her, and she moved through it toward her seat at the governor's table with a steadiness in her step that came from somewhere below, composure from something that was simply at its root, the absence of doubt. She had 1 hour. She used it well. She spoke to Gerald Howe's wife, a quiet woman named Agnes, who looked at Evelyn with eyes that held a complicated kind of sympathy. Agnes knew something, or suspected something, which meant Howe had spoken at home, which meant the information had been spreading in the careful, controlled way that true things spread. She spoke to Judge Harriman, who was eating his supper with the focused calm of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. She spoke to Patience Aldridge, who touched her hand once and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. She did not speak to Nathaniel. He found her at 8:30 at the edge of the dance floor and stood beside her with his wine and his easy manner and said, "You seem distant tonight." "Do I?" she said. "Everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she said. "I always find these evenings a little consuming." He nodded. looked out at the room. "How is here?" he said almost casually. I noticed. We spoke briefly. He seemed himself. A pause. "I think I may have overcomplicated things in my mind this week. Worried where there was no need to worry." She looked at him. "You should trust your instincts," she said quietly. "You've always been good at reading a room." Something in her tone, she had not meant to let it through that particular shade of meaning, made him look at her more carefully. His eyes sharpened slightly. "Evelyn, the governor is signaling," she said. "I believe it's nearly time for my remarks." She set her glass down on a passing tray and walked toward the platform at the north end of the room, and she did not look back. She heard the room beginning to quiet as the governor moved to the platform ahead of her, heard the shift in the crowd, the way conversation dropped and attention gathered. 200 people turning toward the front of the room. 200 people who were about to hear something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The governor made his introduction. She was a pillar of Boston society, a dedicated servant of the charitable foundation her mother had built, a woman whose family had shaped this city for 2 generations. He was pleased to invite her to address the assembled guests. She walked to the platform. She stood at the lectern and looked out at the room. 200 faces, candlelight, an evening dress, and the particular attentiveness of a crowd that expects a short charitable speech and is settling in for exactly that. She found Margaret near the left wall, her expression composed and watchful. She found Charlotte at the corner table upright in her chair, hands folded, eyes on Evelyn's face. She found Samuel near the south entrance, his leather satchel on the floor beside him. And she found Nathaniel. He was standing near the center of the room, glass in hand, and he was watching her with the careful attention of a man who has just begun. Only in the last 30 seconds to understand that something is happening that he did not anticipate. Something in Evelyn's posture, something in the quality of her stillness, something that his instincts were registering before his mind had caught up. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried, and carried to every corner of the ballroom without effort the voice of a woman who had been raised to speak in rooms like this and had never once needed to perform confidence because she had simply always had it. "I want to begin by thanking the governor for his generosity in hosting this evening, and for the extraordinary work this charitable foundation has done in educating children throughout Massachusetts." She paused. "I also want to speak tonight about something that I believe matters more than any single charitable act. Something that is perhaps the foundation on which all genuine generosity must rest." She looked out at the room. "I want to speak about honesty, about the courage it takes to protect the truth, not when it is easy, but when the cost of protecting it is very high." The room was completely quiet now. She reached to the small wooden lectern where Samuel had arranged earlier that evening, a single slim document folder. She did not open it yet. She simply rested one hand on it and continued. "The Ashcroft family has been a part of this city for 80 years, she said. "My grandmother came to this house as a bride in 1736. My mother planted roses in the garden. My father built the timber holdings in western Massachusetts that sustained this family and employed dozens of families for 3 decades. She paused. "I want that legacy to continue. I intend for it to continue. But I have learned in recent months that a legacy can only be protected if the people who hold it are willing to name what threatens it clearly publicly and without flinching." She opened the folder. "Over the past 4 years, property that was left to me by my mother and my father, land, timber rights, and farmland in 3 counties of this state, has been mortgaged without my knowledge or consent. The signatures authorizing those transactions are not mine. They have been analyzed by an independent expert retained by the county magistrate's office, and they are forgeries." She looked up. "The total debt secured against my inherited property without my knowledge amounts to $11,000. The silence in the room changed. It went from attentive to something denser, something charged. "Furthermore," she said, and her voice did not waver by a single degree, "the capital drawn from those fraudulent mortgages was used to fund a private shipping company registered in Salem, Massachusetts under the name Atlantic Meridian Trading, a company whose existence was hidden from the Ashcroft family attorney, from the Ashcroft shipyard partners, and from me. She looked directly at Nathaniel now across the candlelit room, and she held his gaze with the steadiness of a woman who has been saving this moment for 11 weeks. The principal investor in Atlantic Meridian Trading is my husband, Nathaniel Ashcroft. The room erupted. Not in shouting, this was not a crowd that shouted, but the wave of sound that moved through 200 people simultaneously was enormous in its own way. The collective sharp intake of breath, the turning of heads, the rapid low exchange of voice to voice as the information spread outward from the center of the room in every direction at once. Nathaniel did not move. He stood in the center of the room with his wine glass in his hand, and his face, she could see it across the distance, going through something complex and uncontrolled and entirely exposed. All the careful assembly of his expression coming apart under the weight of something he had never permitted himself to truly anticipate. She let the sound of the room run for 5 seconds. Then she raised her hand slightly and the room quieted, because it was that kind of room and she was that kind of woman. "I want to be clear about what I am doing and what I am not doing," she said. "I am not here tonight to destroy anyone. I am here because the truth about my own family's property deserves to be spoken in a public room by me on my own terms, rather than discovered later in a courthouse where no one who matters to this city is present to hear it." She closed the folder. "The full documentation has been filed with the county magistrate's office and reviewed by Judge Harriman. The legal process will proceed on its own schedule and through its proper channels." She looked out at the room. "I have only one further thing to say." She reached into the left side of her bodice and withdrew something small and glittering. She held it up, not dramatically, not theatrically, simply so the room could see it clearly. A sapphire brooch antique with a ring of small diamonds around the setting. The candlelight caught it and threw it back in every direction. "This brooch has been in the Ashcroft family for 80 years, she said. "My grandmother wore it. My mother wore it. I have worn it." She set it down on the edge of the lectern, flat and visible. "It was removed from this estate without my knowledge and given to another person. That person, when she learned the truth of what she had been given, and by whom, returned it." She looked at Charlotte Winslow across the room. Charlotte, who was sitting perfectly still at her table beneath the chandelier, with her hands folded and her eyes bright and her chin up. "I am grateful for her courage." Charlotte's eyes filled. She did not look away. The room was so quiet that Evelyn could hear the candles. Honesty. Evelyn said, "Costs something. Tonight it cost me a great deal. But I have learned from every woman in my family who came before me that integrity is not what you hold on to when it is free. It is what you hold on to when it costs you everything." She stepped back from the lectern. "Thank you for listening." She walked off the platform. The room held its silence for 2 full seconds, that suspended extraordinary silence of 200 people, processing something together, and then the applause began. Not the polite applause of a charitable evening. Something fuller, something genuine, something that started at the tables nearest the platform, and moved outward, and built as it moved until it filled the entire room. Evelyn walked through it without looking at anyone in particular. She was aware of Margaret a few feet away, watching her with an expression that was not quite tears and not quite triumph, but contained something of both. She was aware of Samuel at the south entrance, his hand resting on the leather satchel, his posture, the posture of a man who has just watched something he is proud to have been part of. She was aware of Judge Harriman rising from his chair and moving toward the south corridor, and she was aware of Nathaniel. He had not moved from the center of the room. He was still standing exactly where he had been when she had begun speaking, and the crowd had shifted and resettled around him in the way a crowd shifts around something that has become very still and is difficult to look at directly. His glass was in his hand. His face was, she could only see part of it at this angle, white, completely white. The particular color of a man who has just watched the entire architecture of his carefully constructed life collapse in the space of 6 minutes. She did not go to him. She went to Charlotte Winslow. Charlotte had stood when the applause began, and she was still standing, and when Evelyn reached her table, she extended her hand, not offering it to be shaken, but simply extending it open the way you extend a hand to someone who has been standing in the cold for a very long time. Charlotte took it. "You did it," Charlotte said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We did it," Evelyn said. They stood like that for a moment. Two women, one on each side of a deception that had cost them both something real, and the applause moved around them like weather, like something natural, like something that had always been coming and had simply needed the right moment to arrive. Across the room, Nathaniel set his glass down on a passing tray. He looked at his wife, and she looked back at him, and in that look, which lasted no more than 3 seconds, and which no one else in the room was positioned to fully see everything that had ever been said and not said between them. Everything built and broken and hidden and exposed passed between them without a single word. Then Judge Harriman appeared at Nathaniel's shoulder with two men who were not in uniform, but whose bearing made their purpose clear to anyone paying attention. Nathaniel did not fight it. He was not that kind of man. He went quietly, as he had done everything else carefully controlled, with the last of his dignity held against his chest, like something he was still not ready to set down. The room watched him go, and then the room turned back to Evelyn Ashcroft, who was standing with Charlotte Winslow's hand in hers and the sapphire brooch on the lectern behind her, and 80 years of her family's name intact around her like armor. She had built herself from the truth, and the applause, which had never fully stopped, rose again, and this time it did not stop at all. The applause was still fading when Samuel appeared at Evelyn's elbow. He did not say anything immediately. He simply stood beside her, the way a man stands beside someone after something enormous has just happened, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room to breathe. Around them, the ballroom had broken into the particular kind of organized chaos that follows a public shock, clusters of people pulling together, voices low and rapid, heads bent toward each other, with the urgent intimacy of people processing something they had not expected to witness and were already trying to make sense of. Nathaniel was gone. Judge Harriman had moved him through the south corridor with a quietness that was almost anticlimactic. No scene, no struggle, no dramatic final words. He had simply been there, and then he had not been, and the space where he had stood in the center of the room had already closed over him, the way water closes over a stone. "Are you all right?" Samuel said. "Yes," Evelyn said. She meant it, which surprised her slightly. "The magistrate's clerk will need a formal statement from you in the morning. Nothing elaborate, simply a confirmation that the documents filed are accurate and complete. I'll be there at 9. Charlotte was still beside her. She had not let go of Evelyn's hand immediately. She had held it for the full minute after the applause began, and when she finally released it, she had looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, but was something more honest than either. Something that looked like a person emerging from a long time underwater and taking their first real breath. "I should go," Charlotte said. "You don't have to leave on my account," Evelyn said. "I know." Charlotte looked out at the room, at the faces turning toward them, the curiosity barely veiled behind the social courtesy. "But I think I've been in this room long enough. I think I've done what I came here to do." She picked up her small evening bag from the table. Then she stopped, turned back. "Mrs. Ashcroft Evelyn." It was the first time she had used the given name. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't cover any of it. But I am." "I know you are," Evelyn said. "Go home, Charlotte, sleep, and then figure out what you want your life to look like. That's the only work that matters now." Charlotte nodded once. Then she walked away through the crowd, and the people nearest her stepped aside. Not unkindly, there was something in her bearing, in the straightness of her spine and the quietness of her exit, that seemed to ask for simple dignity and received it. Evelyn watched her go. Margaret appeared at her left side, moving with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has navigated every kind of social situation this city has produced for 40 years. "The governor wishes to speak with you privately," she said. "When you're ready. No rush, he understands the evening has been considerable." "Give me 10 minutes," Evelyn said. Margaret nodded and withdrew. Samuel touched her arm briefly and followed. And Evelyn stood alone for the first time all evening, genuinely alone, a small island of stillness in the middle of the shifting, murmuring crowd, and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened, not triumph. She had been careful all these weeks not to let herself mistake justice for triumph, because she understood those were different things, and that confusing them would cost her something she was not willing to lose. But something had settled in her that had not been settled before. Some long-held tension in the structure of her, in the bones of her, almost had released the way a door releases when the right key finally turns. It was over. No. She corrected herself immediately. It was not over. The legal proceedings would take months. The estate recovery would take longer. There would be difficult days ahead, days in the magistrate's office and the courthouse and the long administrative corridors of property law that would require her attention and her endurance in equal measure. But the hiding was over. The performance was over. The daily discipline of knowing everything and showing nothing, that particular exhausting invisible labor, was finished. She picked up the sapphire brooch from the edge of the lectern where she had left it, pinned it to her bodice, and went to find the governor. The private meeting with Governor Brooks lasted 40 minutes. He was a man who got to the point which she appreciated. He told her that Judge Harriman had formally initiated proceedings against Nathaniel Ashcroft on 3 counts of document fraud and 1 count of property theft by deception. He told her that the magistrate's office had already issued a hold on the Atlantic Meridian assets pending investigation. He told her that James Crowell, the Salem attorney, had been contacted and had rather rapidly, according to the governor's information, indicated a willingness to cooperate with the investigation. "Crowell has done this before," the governor said. "I know," Evelyn said. "Patience Aldridge brought it to my attention. There may be other families in similar circumstances." The governor looked at her carefully. "You've been very thorough." "I have had 11 weeks, she said. "Yes." He leaned back. "Mrs. Ashcroft, I want to be direct with you about something. There will be people, good people in this room tonight who believe that this matter should have been handled privately, that the governor's ball was not the appropriate venue." "I know," she said. "I'm not one of them," he said. "But you should be prepared for that conversation, because it will come. It will come from people who have never been in the position of having their property fraudulently taken from them by someone they trusted," she said quietly. "I understand their position. I don't share it." "No," he said. "I didn't think you would." He stood, which meant the meeting was closing. "The law will run its course. You've ensured that it will run it honestly, which is more than most people in your position would have managed." He extended his hand. "Your mother would be proud of you." She shook it. "She would have done the same," she said. "She simply would have done it faster." The governor laughed. Genuine surprised laughter, the best kind. And she left the anteroom and returned to the ballroom, where the evening was winding toward its close, and the crowd was thinning, and the candles were burning lower. She was nearly at the main entrance when Gerald Howe found her. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a blunt, honest face that had never learned to be politic, and had apparently stopped trying some years ago. He had been at the shipyard for 12 years. He had been Nathaniel's most trusted senior partner. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment simply looked at her with an expression that carried several things at once: remorse, relief, and the particular shame of a man who has realized too late that he saw something coming and did not say so clearly enough. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said. "Mr. Howe, I want you to know—" He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that when I first noticed the discrepancies in the accounts, I went to Nathaniel directly. Before I went anywhere else. He told me it was an accounting error, a clerical matter. He was—" Howe's jaw tightened. "He was very convincing." "He generally is," she said. "I should have pushed harder." "Yes," she said. Not unkindly, but not softening it either. "You should have." Howe absorbed that. "The other partners and I have spoken. We intend to do right by the shipyard workers, the men who had no knowledge of any of this. The wages, the contracts in progress. We'll honor all of it." "I'm glad," she said. "Those men did their jobs honestly. They deserve to be treated accordingly." "And the shipyard itself?" He hesitated. The Ashcroft name is on that yard. If there is any way the family wishes to maintain a stake, let the legal process run first, she said. Then we will discuss what the future looks like. She met his eyes. Thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Howe, and for the questions you started asking 3 weeks ago. They mattered. He nodded, stepped aside. She walked past him and through the entrance and out into the cold October night where her carriage was waiting, and the air smelled of wood smoke and the harbor, and the sharp clarity that comes after something difficult is finally irrevocably done. She did not sleep well that night, which she had expected. She lay in the room that had been her bedroom for 14 years, the room she had shared with a man she now understood she had never fully known. And she listened to the house and thought about practical things deliberately, because the practical things were manageable, and the other things, the older things, the things that lived in the part of her that had loved Nathaniel before she knew what he was, those were not ready to be thought about yet. She thought about the estate recovery timeline, about the Marfield farmland, the timber holdings, the harbor parcel, what it would take to discharge the fraudulent mortgages, how long the legal process would run before the properties were formally restored. She thought about the charitable foundation and the work that needed to happen before winter. She thought about the 40 men Nathaniel had been planning to hire for the shipyard expansion and what Gerald Howe's partnership board would do for them now. She thought about Charlotte in the boarding house on Dedham Street, whether she was sleeping, whether she felt lighter or heavier, or simply emptied out the way a person feels after a long sustained effort finally stops being required of them. At some point before dawn, she slept briefly and deeply, and when she woke, the room was gray with early morning, and the house was quiet, and she lay for a moment before moving, and let herself simply exist in the stillness of it, in the particular quality of a morning that comes after a long night, after a long 11 weeks, after a long 14 years. Then she got up dressed and went downstairs. Mrs. Pratt had tea waiting, which meant Mrs. Pratt had heard something. The household always heard things before Evelyn expected, and was expressing her support in the only way she considered appropriate, which was through the perfect management of domestic details. Evelyn accepted the tea and sat at the breakfast table and looked out the window at the October garden, at the roses along the south wall that had gone to their autumn hips. And she thought about her mother, who had planted them, and about what it meant to tend something for a long time without knowing exactly what it would need you to do. She had known her mother, or she had suspected at the very least. She had told Evelyn once when Evelyn was perhaps 30, and Nathaniel was becoming the kind of man whose ambition had started to outrun his ethics. In small ways that were easy to explain away, she had told her watch carefully, "My love, not what a man says he is, what he does when no one is watching. That is always the true thing." Evelyn had been watching. She had simply not wanted for a very long time to see. She drank her tea. Then she put on her coat and went to the magistrate's office. The formal statement took 2 hours. The clerk was a precise young man named Whitfield, who wrote everything down with the focused care of someone who understood that the document being created would matter for a long time. Samuel was present throughout, seated to her left, occasionally clarifying a date or a document reference number. Judge Harriman stopped in once briefly to confirm that the Atlantic Meridian hold had been formally extended to include 3 additional bank accounts identified overnight by the investigating officers. 3 additional accounts, Evelyn said. In 2 different banks, Harriman said. 1 in Boston, 2 in Salem. He looked at her with the expression of a man delivering information he knows will sting. The total held across all accounts, including the Atlantic Meridian assets, is considerably more than we initially estimated. How much more? Samuel asked. Approximately $4,000 additional dollars, Harriman said, which suggests the Salem operation was more profitable more quickly than the documentation indicated. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. He was going to leave, she said, not for the first time, but saying it here in the magistrate's office with the legal machinery running around her made it land differently than it had in the East sitting room 11 weeks ago. It made it completely, finally real. He had enough. He was going to take it and go. It appears so, Harriman said carefully. When? She said. If you had to estimate, Spring, the judge said. The new year at the latest. She nodded once. Then she picked up her pen and continued the statement. When it was finished and signed and witnessed, she stood and shook Whitfield's hand and thanked him for his thoroughness. She walked with Samuel down the corridor and out into the midday street, and for a moment they both stood in the cold autumn air without speaking. 4,000 more, Samuel said finally. Yes. Are you? I'm fine. She turned up her collar against the wind. Samuel, the Winslow family, Charlotte's mother and sisters. He looked at her. What about them? The promissory letter that Charlotte gave us the transfer document. Nathaniel used it to build legal cover for Atlantic Meridian, which means Charlotte technically was named as a partial investor in an enterprise that is now under a magistrate's hold. Samuel's expression changed. She could be implicated. She could be questioned, certainly. I want you to speak with Harriman before that happens. Charlotte cooperated voluntarily. She provided evidence at significant personal risk. That needs to be on record before anyone decides how to treat her legally. I'll go back this afternoon. Today, Samuel. Not this afternoon. Now. He looked at her for a moment with that expression, the one she had stopped noticing over the past weeks, because it had become so consistent. The slightly odd, slightly unsettled look of a man who keeps being surprised. Now, he confirmed, and turned back toward the magistrate's building. Evelyn walked to her carriage alone. The letter from Nathaniel arrived 3 days later. It was delivered by a young man she didn't recognize, not a household servant, not a legal messenger, someone hired for the purpose, and it was written on plain paper without the Ashcroft letterhead he had used for everything, which told her before she read a word that he already understood he could not make that claim anymore. She opened it at the writing desk. It was 4 paragraphs. She read them once quickly, and then again slowly, and then she set the letter down and looked at it for a while. The first paragraph said he was sorry. The second paragraph explained that he had genuinely believed that the Atlantic Meridian operation would succeed well enough to repay everything before anyone noticed that it had never been his intention to permanently dispossess her of her inherited property, that it had been a temporary measure that had grown beyond what he intended. The third paragraph said that he understood he had made choices he could not undo, and that he would not ask her to forgive him only to understand that the man who had made those choices was not entirely the man she had married. The fourth paragraph said he loved her, had always loved her, that he was aware of what that sounded like given everything, but that it was true, and he wanted her to know it. She sat with the letter for a long time. She thought about the first winter of their marriage, about his cold hands and the fire, and I don't deserve this yet, but I mean to. She thought about the roses he had helped her plant the summer they moved in, carrying soil in his good coat, because they had not yet thought to keep work clothes at the new house. She thought about the first time she lost a pregnancy, and how he had sat on the floor beside the bed and held her hand for 4 hours without saying anything, because there was nothing to say, and he had understood that. She thought about all of it. She let herself feel all of it. She did not push it away or reframe it or use it to construct any kind of argument. Then she folded the letter in thirds and locked it in the drawer with the others. She did not write back, not because she was cruel, not because she did not believe some portion of what he had written, but because some things once broken do not require a response. They simply require you to know what they were and to move on. 2 weeks after the ball, Charlotte Winslow came to the Ashcroft house for the second time. This time, she came to the front entrance. She was wearing a different dress, not the blue one, not the brown one, something simpler and better fitted and clearly her own, and she carried herself with a straightness that had not been there the first time Evelyn had met her. Evelyn received her in the front parlor. Mrs. Pratt brought tea without being asked. "I want you to know that I've spoken with my father," Charlotte said when they were settled. It was a difficult conversation. I told him everything. She paused. He was not easy to tell, but he knew something was wrong. He had known for months. He had simply been hoping he was wrong about it. "How is he?" Ashamed, I think. And angry at Nathaniel, not at me, which I did not fully expect. She wrapped both hands around her teacup. He wants to move the family out of Boston. There's a cousin in Providence who has offered work. He thinks a fresh start would be better. What do you think? Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I think he's right, she said. I think Boston is... There are too many people here who know the story, and not enough of them know the whole of it. She looked up. I've been thinking about teaching. There are schools in the western counties that need teachers. I have enough education. I learn quickly. You do, Evelyn said. And she meant it. She had watched Charlotte learn the whole of a complicated truth in the space of a few weeks and handle it with a grace she had not been trained for. Mr. Bradford told me I won't face any legal consequences, Charlotte said. That you spoke with the judge. Yes. You didn't have to do that. No, Evelyn agreed. I didn't have to. Charlotte looked at her across the tea table. This woman who had every reason to have treated her as nothing more than collateral damage, who had instead treated her as a person who deserved the truth and the chance to do something with it, and her eyes went bright in a way she controlled quickly and completely. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You already have, Evelyn said. You told me the truth when you didn't have to. You gave me a document that cost you something real to give, and you walked into that ballroom and sat in the hardest seat in the room and held yourself together. She met Charlotte's eyes. That was not nothing, Charlotte. That was a great deal. Charlotte nodded, set her cup down. I should go. We're leaving next week and there's a great deal to do. She stood. They walked together to the front entrance. At the door, Charlotte stopped and turned. Will you be all right? She said. I mean truly. Will you? It was such a simple question, such a direct human question asked without any agenda, without any calculation, just a young woman asking an older one whether she was going to be all right. Evelyn felt something in her chest shift. Yes, she said. I believe I will be. Charlotte nodded once, as if she had needed to hear it confirmed. Then she walked down the front steps and along the path toward the street, and Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched her go until she turned the corner and was out of sight. She stood there for another moment after that, in the doorway of her house in the October cold, with the autumn light sharp and clean on everything around her. The estate would take months to recover. The legal proceedings would continue through the winter and possibly into spring. There would be difficult days and exhausting days and days when the sheer administrative weight of it would make her want to sit down and not get up. But Charlotte was walking toward something new. And Evelyn was standing in her own doorway, in her own house, wearing her own brooch. And Nathaniel was gone, and the truth had been spoken in a room full of witnesses, and could not be unspoken. That was the thing about the truth, she thought, closing the door against the October cold, going back inside, going back to her desk and the next document and the next step, and the steady, necessary work of rebuilding. The thing about the truth was that once it was out, it belonged to everyone who had heard it. You couldn't negotiate it back. You couldn't quietly settle it. You couldn't make it small again. She sat at her desk, pulled the next document toward her, and got to work. It was Margaret who came at the end of that week on a Friday afternoon without sending word ahead. Mrs. Pratt showed her into the east sitting room and brought tea and closed the door, and Margaret sat in the chair across from Evelyn and looked at her with the frank, clear-eyed regard of someone who has known a person long enough to see them accurately. You look tired, Margaret said. I am tired, Evelyn said. Good, Margaret said. Tired means you did something real. Evelyn looked at her. Is that wisdom or just something you're saying? Both, Margaret said pleasantly. How are the legal proceedings? Moving forward. Slowly but forward. And the estate recovery. Samuel estimates 6 to 8 months before the fraudulent mortgages are formally discharged. The Marfield farmland should be clear first. It has the most straightforward documentation. The timber holdings will take longer. And you. Not the estate. You. Evelyn looked at her hands. They were folded on the desk in the habitual posture, composed still the posture of a woman in control of herself and her circumstances. She looked at them for a moment, and then slowly she unfolded them and set them flat on the desk, palms down, and let them simply rest there. Open. Not performing anything. "I think," she said carefully, "that I am going to be all right. I think that's true, but I think it's going to take longer than I expected." She paused. "I spent 14 years with that man. I loved him. I did love him, whatever he became. And that—" She stopped. "That is not the kind of thing that resolves itself quickly, even when you know every reason why it should." Margaret looked at her with the steady, unsentimental warmth of a woman who has outlasted enough loss to understand it clearly. "No," she said, "it isn't." "I don't regret any of it," Evelyn said. "What I did, the way I did it, I would do all of it the same way again." "I know you would. But I am—" She paused again, looking for the right word, finding it. "Sad. I am sad. Underneath all of it, underneath the proceedings and the documents and everything that still needs to be done, I am simply sad." "Yes," Margaret said. "You should be. You lost something real, even if what you lost was partly a thing that never quite existed." She set her cup down. "Give yourself time to be sad, Evelyn. You have earned that much." Evelyn looked at her. At this woman who had been in her life since she was a child, who had stood at the edge of her wedding and now sat in the aftermath of its ending. Something in her chest released not the door hinge feeling from the night of the ball, but something smaller, quieter, more personal. Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. "I intend to," she said. And for the first time in 11 weeks, she said something that was neither strategy, nor composure, nor the performance of strength. She simply told the truth about how she felt. And that she thought sitting in the East Room with the October light on the window, and Margaret's quiet company, and the brooch pinned to her dress, and the long road of recovery stretching out ahead of her, that was perhaps the hardest thing she had done yet. And the most necessary. The winter came early that year. By the first week of November, the harbor had gone gray and cold, and the elms along Beacon Street had shed everything standing bare against a sky the color of pewter. Evelyn noticed the change, the way she noticed most things now fully without rushing past it, without the old habit of moving through the present moment toward the next obligation. She had spent 14 years moving efficiently from one thing to the next. She was learning slowly, and with some difficulty to stop. The legal proceedings moved on their own schedule, which was slower than she wanted, and faster than Samuel had predicted. Judge Harriman ran a precise courtroom and had no patience for delay tactics, which Nathaniel's newly retained attorney attempted twice and abandoned after the second attempt produced nothing except the judge's visible irritation. The fraudulent mortgage documents were entered into evidence in the second week of November. The signature analyses were presented the week after. The testimony from Crowell's former clerk, a thin, nervous young man named Abbott, who had clearly been waiting years for someone to give him permission to tell the truth, lasted 2 full days and was, by Samuel's account, devastating. Evelyn attended every session. She sat in the gallery with Samuel on one side, and on 3 occasions Margaret on the other, and she listened to the full architecture of what Nathaniel had built and dismantled and rebuilt and hidden, and she did not look away from any of it. She had decided early on that she would attend. Some people, Gerald Howe's wife among them, Patience Aldridge among them, had suggested gently that it might be easier not to, that the distance might be kinder. She had thanked them and gone anyway. She was not looking for easier. She was looking for complete. Nathaniel sat at the defense table with his attorney and did not look at her. Not once in 3 weeks of proceedings did he turn toward the gallery. She had expected this, or something like it. He was a man who moved forward, always forward, who found looking back unbearable, but sitting 10 feet behind him and watching the set of his shoulders while the evidence dismantled everything he had constructed was a different kind of knowing than she had anticipated. It was not satisfying. It was not cruel. It was simply the final education in a subject she had been studying for 14 years, and had never fully understood until now. On the fourth week, Nathaniel's attorney approached Samuel with a proposal. Evelyn heard about it at the end of a Tuesday morning session in the corridor outside the courtroom, where Samuel pulled her aside, with the careful expression of a man delivering something complicated. "He wants to make a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence," Samuel said low and even. "Voluntary admission on all counts. In exchange, his attorney is asking the magistrate to consider the Navy contract work as a mitigating factor, the argument being that the shipyard's contracts benefit the public good, and a lengthy imprisonment would harm the workers." Evelyn looked at him. "What does Harriman think?" "He's inclined to consider it. Not because of the shipyard argument, he's not moved by that. But a full voluntary admission on all counts strengthens the civil recovery considerably. It removes the possibility of appeal on the property restoration." Samuel paused. "It means the Marfield farmland, the timber holdings, the harbor parcel, all of it is restored to you without further litigation. The Atlantic Meridian assets are formally dissolved and distributed to the creditors, which includes the estate. And Nathaniel, 2 years in the county jail, followed by 5 years of supervised restriction on any property or business transactions." Samuel held her gaze. "He will not be able to rebuild easily. He will not disappear to Salem and start again. Every financial move he makes for 5 years will require legal oversight." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. People moved past them in the corridor, clerks' attorneys, a pair of young men with document satchels, who glanced at her and then away with the quick discretion of people who recognized her and understood they should not appear to. "Is the admission complete?" she said. "Every count, every property. Atlantic Meridian, the forged signatures, the transfer document with Charlotte, all of it." His attorney has confirmed all of it, yes. And Abbott's testimony. Does the admission include confirmation of what Abbott said about Crowell's involvement in the earlier cases? The other families? Samuel looked at her with a sharpened attention. "You want the other cases included? If Crowell has done this to other families, if there are women in this city who lost property the same way I did and accepted quiet settlements because they had no Samuel Bradford and no Margaret Livingston and no 11 weeks to prepare, then Nathaniel's admission needs to confirm Crowell's pattern. Because that is what opens the door to those other cases being reopened." "Evelyn," Samuel said carefully, "that is beyond what his attorney is offering." "Then it is not yet a complete offer," she said. "Tell them that if the admission does not include a full confirmation of Crowell's involvement in prior fraudulent transactions, I will not support the reduced sentence arrangement. The full proceedings continue." Samuel looked at her for 5 full seconds. "You understand that continuing the full proceedings means another 6 to 8 weeks, he said. "Yes." "And the estate recovery is delayed accordingly." "Yes." "You are willing to wait 6 to 8 more weeks for those other families to have what I had?" She met his eyes without any ambiguity. "Yes, Samuel, I am." He held her gaze. Then something in his expression settled that familiar combination of admiration and slight awe, and he nodded once and went back into the courthouse. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she put on her gloves and went outside into the November cold, and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed. A woman walking past with a market basket glanced at her, a middle-aged woman plainly dressed carrying her own burdens in the frank way that working women carry things, and their eyes met briefly, the way strangers' eyes sometimes meet on a street with no particular reason and no particular meaning. Except that the woman nodded, a small nod, the kind that says, "I know who you are. I know what you're doing here." "Good." Evelyn nodded back. Then she went down the steps and home. Nathaniel's attorney agreed to the expanded admission 3 days later. It took 2 additional days to draft, review, and certify. Samuel went over every line 4 times. Evelyn went over it twice herself in the East Room at midnight with a candle and her reading glasses, and the complete file open beside her for reference. When she was satisfied that every word was accurate and every case referenced was correctly documented, she signed the supporting affidavit and sent it back. The formal admission was entered on a Thursday morning. She was in the gallery. She watched Nathaniel stand and speak in the flat, controlled voice of a man who has made a decision and is executing it with the same thoroughness he had brought to everything else in his life. Everything she thought except the marriage. He admitted to 4 counts of document fraud. He admitted to property theft by deception across 3 separate parcels. He admitted to the creation of Atlantic Meridian Trading using fraudulently obtained capital. He confirmed in specific and damaging detail his knowledge of James Crowell's prior history and his deliberate choice to engage Crowell precisely because of that history. When he finished, the courtroom was very quiet. Then he turned. For the first time in 4 weeks of proceedings, Nathaniel Ashcroft turned and looked directly at his wife in the gallery. She had not expected it. She had told herself she expected everything had prepared for everything. But this, she had not prepared for the full direct weight of his gaze across 10 feet of courtroom air with nothing left between them. No performance, no calculation, no carefully assembled expression. Just his face, which she had known for 14 years, looking at her with something that was too complicated to name and too honest finally to look away from. She held his gaze. She did not nod, did not speak, did not soften, and did not harden. She simply looked at him the way she had learned to look at difficult things fully without flinching, without rushing toward any particular feeling about it. Then Judge Harriman called the courtroom to order, and the moment passed, and Nathaniel turned back to face the bench. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and breathed. It was over. It was truly, completely, irrevocably over. Not because she hated him, not because she had destroyed him, but because the truth had been told in full, in a court of law, with witnesses and documents, and the complete weight of an honest record behind it. The truth that belonged to her and to the families Crowell had wronged, and to every person who had been owed an honest accounting and had not received one. She had given them that. That was enough. The twist no one had seen coming arrived 6 days after the formal admission. It came in the form of a letter from a woman named Dorothea Marsh. No relation to the seamstress Caroline, simply an unfortunate coincidence of surnames, who lived in Gloucester, and who had, after reading a brief account of the Ashcroft proceedings in the Boston Courier, written to Judge Harriman's office to report that her family had experienced a nearly identical situation 7 years prior involving a land transfer in Essex County, and a Salem attorney whose description matched James Crowell precisely. Harriman forwarded the letter to Samuel. Samuel brought it to Evelyn on a Monday morning, and she read it at her desk with the steadiness of a woman who has learned to receive information without performing her reaction to it. And when she finished, she set it down and looked at the window for a moment. "There are more," she said. "Harriman is already receiving inquiries," Samuel said. 3 more letters arrived at the courthouse this week from families in Essex and Middlesex counties, all describing similar circumstances, all naming attorneys who appear to be connected to Crowell's network. "A network," she said. "It appears so." She looked at the letter in her hand. Dorothea Marsh of Gloucester, a woman she had never met living 40 miles north who had lost something 7 years ago and had believed until last week that she had simply lost it, and that was the end of it. "I want to write to her," Evelyn said. Samuel looked at her carefully. "Personally, yes. I want her to know that what happened to her family was not an isolated incident and was not her fault and is not finished." She set the letter on the desk. "And I want you to speak with Harriman about whether the Crowell investigation can be formally expanded to include the prior cases." "That is a significant undertaking," Samuel said slowly. "Yes," she said. "It is. It could take years." "Yes. Evelyn." He leaned forward slightly. "You have just come through 11 months of the hardest legal and personal battle of your life. Your estate is in recovery. You are—" He paused carefully. "You are still healing. No one would expect you to take on Samuel." She looked at him with the same level, clear expression she had been looking at difficult things with for the past year. "My mother built a foundation to educate children because she believed that ignorance was the most correctable injustice she could address from where she stood. She did it for 20 years. She did not stop because it was a significant undertaking. She picked up her pen. I am not stopping because it is a significant undertaking. I am simply deciding what the next right thing is. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his own pen. Tell me what you need, he said. So, she wrote to Dorothea Marsh that afternoon. The letter was 2 pages. It was honest and specific and warm, without being false about the difficulty of what Dorothea was facing if she chose to pursue a legal remedy. Evelyn told her what she had done and how. She told her what it had cost not to frighten her, but because she believed women deserved to know the true cost of things before they committed to them. She told her that Samuel Bradford would be willing to review whatever documentation she had without charge, simply to assess whether a case existed. And she told her that she was not alone, that there were other families, that the network of harm that had been operating in the shadows of Massachusetts property law for nearly a decade was now visible, now named, now being examined in the light of a formal legal proceeding, and that visibility, she had learned, was the beginning of everything. She sent the letter. Then she wrote 3 more to the other families. Harriman had mentioned different circumstances, but the same essential shape, the same offer of Samuel's review, the same honest account of what justice actually looked like when you pursued it carefully and completely. When she finished, it was nearly dark. Mrs. Pratt appeared in the doorway with a lamp and the quiet concern of a woman who has watched her employer work through too many evenings and is too professional to say so directly. Supper, ma'am, she said. In a moment, Evelyn said. She looked at the 4 sealed letters on the desk. 4 women she had never met. 4 families carrying something they didn't know yet could be put down. She thought about Caroline Marsh, the seamstress on Tremont Street, who had written a letter she didn't have to write, who had decided that her conscience was worth more than her comfort. She thought about Charlotte Winslow handing over an oilskin packet from the bottom of a trunk. She thought about Gerald Howe asking the right questions 3 weeks before she needed him to. She thought about Patience Aldridge remembering a conversation from 2 winters ago. She thought about Margaret arranging a seating chart with the quiet efficiency of a woman who understood that the truth properly positioned is the most powerful thing in any room. None of them had been required to do what they did. Every single one of them had done it anyway. She picked up the letters and carried them to Mrs. Pratt with instructions for the Morning Post. Then she went to supper. December arrived. The Marfield farmland was formally restored to the Ashcroft estate on the 14th, a Tuesday, with a ceremony at the county registrar's office that lasted 20 minutes and involved no drama whatsoever, which was exactly as Evelyn had wanted it. Samuel shook her hand. The registrar, a quiet man named Oakes, who had been doing this work for 30 years and had clearly seen the full range of what property law could produce, signed the restoration document with a careful, satisfied deliberateness that suggested he too understood the significance of what he was signing. She walked out of the registrar's office into the December cold with the restoration document in her hand and stood on the steps and looked at it. Marfield farmland. Her mother's land. Her grandmother's land before that. 30 acres of good Massachusetts soil that had grown wheat and corn and kept families fed for 3 generations. Hers again. She folded the document, put it in her coat, walked to her carriage. That evening, she went to the Charitable Foundation office, a modest set of rooms on School Street that her mother had established, and that had been running on a reduced budget since the legal proceedings began constraining the estate's available capital. And she sat with the foundation's administrator, a practical woman named Mrs. Good, who had been managing the operations with impressive efficiency despite the circumstances, and she told her the restoration was done. Mrs. Good looked at her across the desk. The winter funding, she said. Restored, Evelyn said. In full. All 4 schools. Mrs. Good's expression did something complicated. She was not in general a demonstrative woman. She was precise and organizational and kept her reactions in careful check, which was one of the reasons Evelyn trusted her completely. But for one moment, something crossed her face that was not professional and was not managed and was entirely human. Those children, Mrs. Good said, some of them have been waiting since September to find out whether there would be a winter term at all. Tell them there will be, Evelyn said. Tell them it's certain. Christmas came. It was quiet. Evelyn spent it at the estate with Mrs. Pratt and the household staff, and on Christmas afternoon with Margaret and Patience, who arrived together in Margaret's carriage, carrying food and wine, and the particular warm energy of women who have decided that a person should not be alone on a significant day, and have simply acted on that decision without asking for permission. They ate together in the front dining room. They spoke about the foundation schools, about the Crowell investigation and its expanding reach, about Patience's granddaughter's engagement and Margaret's ongoing committee work, and Mrs. Pratt's nephew, who had apparently shown some unexpected promise at the new Roxbury schoolhouse, funded by the Ashcroft Foundation. They spoke about everything and nothing, the way people who know each other well can speak easily without performance, with the comfort of shared history, making every silence as easy as every word. At one point, Patience said without particular preamble, "I heard from Catherine Aldrich that Nathaniel has been moved to the county facility at Concord." A brief quiet. "I know," Evelyn said. "Is that—" Patience paused, with the delicacy of a woman choosing words with great care. "Are you at peace with how things stand?" Evelyn considered the question honestly. She had been considering it in various forms for weeks, in the early mornings before the household woke, in the late evenings after the documents were filed and the letters written and the practical work done. The question of peace, the question of whether you could arrive at peace with something that had cost you so much, not because the cost was acceptable, but because the alternative to peace was carrying it forever, and she had already carried it long enough. "I think," she said slowly, "that peace is not something you arrive at all at once. I think it comes in pieces, small ones mostly. A morning when you wake up, and the first thing you think about is not him, but something ordinary, what the day holds, whether the East Garden needs attention, whether Mrs. Pratt's cold has improved." She looked at the table. "I have more of those mornings than I did 2 months ago. I expect I will have more still in another 2 months." She looked up. "So yes, I think I am getting there." Margaret raised her glass. "To getting there," she said. "To getting there." Patience agreed. Evelyn raised hers. The three women drank in the quiet of the dining room, with the December dark outside the windows and the fire going well, and the house around them holding all of its history, the good of it and the difficult of it, the 80 years of women who had sat in rooms like this and made decisions and kept going. The letter from Charlotte arrived in January. It was postmarked from a town in western Massachusetts called Greenfield, which Evelyn located on the map in the library as a small settlement in the Connecticut River Valley, surrounded by farmland and timber, and the kind of landscape that a person goes to when they want to start over completely. The letter was 3 pages written in Charlotte's careful hand, and it described a schoolroom. 8 students, ages 6 through 14. A borrowed building on the edge of town with good morning light. A family, the Hendersons farmers, who had taken Charlotte in as a boarder and treated her with the straightforward decency of people who had no knowledge of her history and no interest in it beyond who she showed herself to be from day to day. "I am learning to be a teacher," Charlotte wrote. "It is harder than I expected and more rewarding than I expected, and most days I come home from it too tired to think about anything that came before. I believe that is exactly what I needed." She wrote about her students, a boy named Eli, who could not yet read but had extraordinary mathematical instinct, a girl named Mary, who read everything she could find and asked questions that Charlotte sometimes could not answer, which she had decided to treat as a feature rather than a problem. She wrote about the Connecticut River in winter, about the Hendersons' kitchen where she took her meals, about the particular quality of quiet in a place where no one knew your story. Near the end of the letter, she wrote, "I think about that evening sometimes. The ballroom, the look on people's faces, the way you stood at that lectern and spoke as if you had been born knowing how to do exactly that. I have thought about it many times when I needed to do something that frightened me. I think about how you looked, and I think if she could do that, I can do this. Whatever this is, I can do it." Evelyn read that paragraph twice. Then she set the letter on the desk and looked at the window for a long moment. And something in her chest moved in the way it had been moving lately. Not the door hinge feeling, not the release of held tension, but something quieter, Something that felt like being seen, like being known, like the particular warmth of understanding that the things you did when you were afraid and did not show it had mattered to someone who was watching. She wrote back that afternoon. 4 pages. She told Charlotte about the foundation schools, about Dorothea Marsh and the expanded Crowell investigation, about the Marfield restoration and the December morning at the registrar's office, and the way Oakes had signed the document with such deliberate satisfaction. She told her about Christmas with Margaret and Patience. She told her about Eli with his mathematical instinct, and said that in her experience, the children who could not yet read but understood numbers deeply were often the most interesting people in any room, and that Charlotte should pay particular attention to him. She did not write about Nathaniel. There was nothing to write about Nathaniel that needed to go into a letter to Charlotte. That chapter was documented officially completely in the records of the county court. That was where it belonged. She wrote instead about spring. About the Ashcroft estate in the spring, about what she was planning for the south garden, about the roses along the wall that would bloom again in June, and that she had decided to extend a new section along the east wall using cuttings from the original plants. A continuation of what her mother had started, larger than before, growing toward something. "I hope Greenfield treats you well," she wrote at the close. "I hope the schoolroom fills up. I hope Eli learns to read, and Mary finds every answer she is looking for. I hope the Connecticut River is beautiful in spring, and that you are standing on its bank one morning soon and feeling without any effort at all exactly like yourself." She sealed the letter. Then she sat for a moment in the January afternoon with the quiet of the house around her, and the fire going, and the document case closed on the desk beside her, and the sapphire brooch on her dress where it had been every day since the night of the governor's ball where she intended it to remain. February brought the final document she had been waiting for. It came from Harriman's office, a formal certification that the investigation into James Crowell's prior activities had produced enough corroborating evidence to support reopening 3 of the 7 cases identified in the original inquiry. 3 families, 3 sets of property records, 3 women in different counties of Massachusetts who had been told years ago that what had happened to their land was simply the consequence of a legal transaction they had apparently agreed to. They had not agreed to any of it. Evelyn read the certification at her desk on a Wednesday morning in February, with the snow falling outside and the fire going, and Mrs. Pratt's footsteps moving through the house in the familiar rhythm of a household that was functioning fully and properly as it always had been meant to. She set the document down. She thought about the morning she had first read Caroline Marsh's letter, the January morning a year and a month ago, when she had pressed her palm against the cold window glass and known with the particular certainty that comes before the pain fully arrives that everything had changed. She thought about the weight of that morning, about the decision she had made in it, not a dramatic decision, not a single moment of heroic resolve, but a quieter thing, the choice to know everything, and then to act on what she knew, and to do it with the full honesty she had in her. She thought about what that choice had cost. She thought about what it had given back. Not just the land, not just the legal victory, not just the restoration of property and name, and the quiet satisfaction of a record set straight. Something larger. Something that was harder to name and more difficult to measure, and would last considerably longer than any single court proceeding. She had shown to Charlotte, and to Margaret, and to Patience, and to Dorothea Marsh in Gloucester, and to the 3 women whose cases were now being reopened, and to the 200 people who had been standing in a ballroom when she spoke the truth clearly into the air. She had shown that it was possible to be wronged deeply, and to respond with precision instead of rage, with evidence instead of accusation, with the kind of patient, thorough, unbreakable commitment to honesty that does not make noise but cannot be argued with. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. She picked up her pen. She began the next letter. Outside, the February snow kept falling on the Boston streets, on the harbor, on the Marfield farmland 30 miles west, where her grandmother had walked, and her mother had walked, and she herself had walked as a child, not yet knowing what the land would one day require of her. The snow fell on the courthouse where the records were filed. It fell on the schoolroom in Greenfield, where Charlotte Winslow was teaching 8 children how to read. It fell on the roses along the south wall of the Ashcroft estate, bare and dormant under their winter covering, holding everything they needed for spring without any visible sign of it, waiting, patient, certain of what they were. Samuel arrived at 10 o'clock as he did every Wednesday morning and found her already at the desk with the file open and the next set of documents organized, and her pen in her hand, and the particular quality of focused, purposeful stillness about her that he had come to recognize as her natural state. Not sadness, not hardness, not the performance of strength, but the real thing. The kind that does not require an audience or an occasion, the kind that simply is. He sat down across from her and opened his satchel. Dorothea Marsh's documentation arrived from Gloucester, he said. It's more complete than she indicated. There's a signed witness statement from her former neighbor that corroborates the timeline entirely. Good, Evelyn said. Add it to the Crowell file. And the harbor parcel restoration is on schedule. Oakes estimates the certification will be complete by March. Good. The foundation school's spring enrollment numbers are up. Mrs. Good sent word this morning. All 4 schools higher than last year. Evelyn set her pen down, looked at him, smiled genuinely fully without any performance in it at all. That, she said, is the best news I have heard all month. Samuel smiled back. I thought you'd say that. She picked up her pen again. Outside, the snow was still falling. Inside, the fire was steady, and the documents were in order, and the work was continuing as it always continued, as it would continue. Long after this particular morning was nothing more than one quiet day in the long history of a family that had stood for honesty when it cost something real to do so. Some things Evelyn Ashcroft had learned are not finished in a single dramatic moment. They are finished in the daily choosing. Every morning you get up and do the next right thing. Every letter you write to a woman you have never met. Every document you file with patience instead of fury. Every time you hold the truth in your hands and refuse to set it down, no matter how heavy it gets. That is how legacies are made. Not in the moment of triumph. In every ordinary day that comes after, when no one is watching, when there is no applause, when it is simply you and your conscience, and the next right thing to do. Evelyn had learned that. She had learned it the hard way, which was the only way that truly sticks. And she would carry it forward in her name, in her land, in the schools her mother built, and the cases she was reopening, and the roses she would plant in spring along the east wall. She would carry it forward into every year that remained to her, without apology and without faltering, because that was who she was. That was who she had always been. And no one, not betrayal, not deception, not 14 years of a lie she had been too trusting to see, had ever managed to take that from her. No one ever would.